G'day everybody, how you going today? It's so good to see you. I do hope that you are super well. How are you going? Well, yes, today I want to speculate on what camera Nikon might be releasing next. There's been a lot of chat about the Z8, and for some reason I don't feel like that is the next camera. And it's probably got more to do with the competition than it does with what Nikon users might actually want. And that's because I think the camera that I think it's going to be is going to sit squarely in the middle of all of this. It's going to be the ultimate hybrid kind of entry to mid-level camera that's going to cover all bases pretty well. So let's get into, this is not the Z8, this is something completely different. What I think is most likely is that the Z6 III will be the next camera from Nikon. And I've got a couple of compelling reasons. Most of them are all circumstantial. So this is complete speculation based on rough analysis of the market. The first one being the Z6. I purchased my second Z6 around about 18 months ago, and it was on a super duper sale. And I thought to myself at the time, are they starting to run these cameras out? Why is it so affordable? Now, if you look around the web now and you try and find yourself a Z6, an original Z6, not a Z6 II, not one of these ones, this here is a Z6 II. It's a different camera. It's got 2 slots, it's got 2 processors. It's very hard to find a brand new Z6. The interesting thing is you can still find Z7s. So Z7s are still out there, but Z6s are not. Now, this simply might be a stock thing. Z6 is cheaper, it's more popular, it's more of an all-rounder than the Z7, so the Z7 takes longer to sell. That's fine. But what it does mean, they're not making any more? Well, they're probably not making any more if it's been this long. The stock is out and they're making space for what's next. Well, if you don't have a Z6 and you've only got a Z6 II and the next potential camera, and if we're still running on the 2-year cycle that we have with the first 2 editions, 2018 for the release of the Z6, 2020 for the release of the Z6 II, well, will it be 2022, maybe 2023 for the Z6 III? So that's reason number 1. The Z6 has been out of stock for a while. Now the next reason, and this is driven by their competitors, the Sony a7 IV, which is a camera that looks a lot like this, the Fuji X-H2S, which is a camera that looks a lot like this, and I suppose the Canon R6. Now, these are all what I would call next generation cameras beyond where the Z6 II is currently sitting. Now, clearly the Z6 sits absolutely bang in the middle of Nikon's lineup. It's a consummate all-rounder. 24 megapixels is a great place to be for the majority of people. It shoots 4K video, it shoots 4K 60 if you've got the 2 variant, it's got your 2 card slots, all those sorts of things. So I can kind of imagine that the Z6 or the Z6 II is probably up there with one of the biggest sellers for Nikon because it's full frame plus it's fairly highly featured. But all of its competitors, all of its big competitors, Sony, Canon, and Fuji not full frame, but I still think they have some compelling products, well, they are all in their next generation. Middle of the range, I think their higher selling cameras, like I would say the Sony a7 III, and then there's Sony a7 IV is probably the biggest selling cameras for Sony. And I would say with Canon, the R6 and the R5 would fit in that category, but perhaps it's the R6 because it's at that cheaper price point. It's imperative, I think, that Nikon answers the question of the R6, the a7 IV, and somewhat the Fuji X-H2S. These are all next gen. These are all cameras that sit in that sort of $2,500 roughly to $3,000 US price point, or here in Australia, it's kind of somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 depending on retailers and sales and all that sort of stuff. This really is your middle of the range all-rounder cameras. Now, if you look at what, for example, the Sony a7 IV is offering, it gives us more megapixels, and I think this is where Nikon really have to dive in. You get more megapixels at 33, and you get video, 10-bit video, and these seem to be two things that people are interested in. Now, personally, I don't mind too much about 10-bit video. We are shooting on 8-bit video right now, and it works great for content creators and people that are putting things online. Now, sure, there is more flexibility with 10-bit, and I enjoy that flexibility, but I have to say, in the real world, I've never really had any problems with 8-bit footage. But it is the next standard. And for example, with the Fuji, with the Sony, with the Canon, this is what we're getting as the baseline, 10-bit. So to some extent, Nikon have to keep up with the Joneses. So I think in a Z6 III, we're going to see 10-bit video becoming a standard, something that you can just get in the box. Also, another thing that's pretty interesting with, say, the Fuji X-H2S is we're getting ProRes. Now, we're not getting ProRes RAW, but we are getting other iterations of ProRes internal. And this is something super exciting. It makes these machines start to kind of get up to another level. So I think Nikon need to think about what Fuji are doing with their $3,500 to $4,000 Australian camera. Nikon need to think about what Sony are doing with their $3,500 to $4,000 a7 IV. And this is where I want to talk about megapixels, that 33 megapixels. Now, it seems like a big jump from 24 to 33 megapixels. And it's actually roughly only around 1,000 pixels on the long edge. From a photographic perspective, you know, that's great, but I have to say my favorite sensor of all time was in the D800E, is the variant that I had, and the D810. They were both packing a 36 megapixel sensor. Now, I love that sensor. I love the size of the photo sites, the amount of light they were able to capture. It felt supernatural, looked great. Now, I love the D850, I love the Z7, I love the Z9, I love 45 megapixels, there's nothing wrong with that, but I was also very comfortable and very happy with 36. So 33 is super close to 36. And there's another interesting thing that 33 megapixels gives us, and that is up to roughly 7K of video. And I've really enjoyed shooting in 8K and being able to punch in and move around the frame. It has created much more dynamic choices in the edit suite where I can do so much more for a client, and it does make you feel like you're actually shooting with multi-cameras. So it's quite an amazing thing to have all those extra pixels that you can use in the edit suite. 7K is not that different to 8K, so you're still going to be able to jump around the frame a great deal. And if I was Nikon, I would be giving the Z6 III most of what the Z9 does from a focus perspective. That's it. Focus and tracking and speed perspective. I do not expect the same level of frame rates. And as I have speculated before, I do think there's a chance that the Nikon Z9 may go even faster in RAW. Let's just talk about that for a second. The Z9 currently shoots in 12-bit RAW, 60 frames per second in video. It currently does that. We know that it does that. The Sony A1 currently shoots at 30 frames per second RAW in something like 12 or 13-bit. Changing the bit rate, it does allow us to capture more images because there is less data in each image. And Nikon are showing us this with 8K RAW 12-bit video at 60 frames per second. So let's theorize that the Z9 goes up to, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 frames per second, or maybe even all the way to that 60 at 12-bit, which means you could bring the Z6 III in at 20 frames per second RAW, which would be amazing and super fast and better than most of their other full-frame competition at this price point. And they would actually blow the market away, let alone the fact that you might get 120 frames per second in JPEG. Who knows? Now, we don't get 8K, so it's not cannibalizing that with the Z9. We would not get 2 hours of recording in 7K because of the lack of heat dissipation. You don't have the vertical grip and all that extra metal in the body, in the chassis to dissipate heat. But this would still be a very powerful all-rounder. So the Z6 III, it does not cannibalize the Z9. It gets close to it in many ways, with that 33 megapixel sensor, with that 7K of video, with that 10-bit, and it might have great frame rates as well. And who knows, I think the only question left open to me is, would they go with a stacked sensor? Now that's a tough one, because I suspect stacked sensors are way more expensive than not stacked sensors. The Fuji has a stacked sensor, and it's at this price point. That's the X-H2S, but it is a cropped sensor, so it's cheaper. You can fit more of them onto one die. The Sony a7 IV is not a stacked sensor, and perhaps its biggest Achilles heel is the fact that that sensor is slow, and we do get a little bit of the jello effect. So another place that Nikon could trump Sony is to create a faster and or a stacked sensor. Now, it might make the Nikon slightly more expensive, but if it had all these features that we're talking about in it, absolutely amazing, and might be worth an extra $200 or $300 over the Sony a7 IV. So this is the reasons why I think the Z6 III is the most likely camera. Now, I can hear people out there saying, well, but we want the D850 replacement. We want the Z8, if that's what it is. And I kind of feel like a lot of those users have been satiated with the Z9, and a lot of other D850 users, and here's one of my two D850s, well, a lot of D850 users are still happily using their D850s. Their use case doesn't really require them to go to mirrorless. If you're wondering which camera Nikon would probably sell more of tomorrow, would it be a Z8 at anywhere between 45 and 60 megapixels? Maybe more, but I don't know. Or would it be a Z6 III that had a 33 megapixel sensor in it, shoots 7K, is almost as fast as a Z9, and it's basically got the focus system that we all know and love Nikon can do today? Which would you prefer? Which would most people get? What would most photographers buy? If you're a sports, if you're weddings, if you are pretty much any type of photographer, 33 megapixels is more than enough, I think, for the majority of people. And I would say the Z8 going 45, 50 and above, that becomes more of a niche product. Nikon have got to put their resources where they're going to sell the most units. And I think it's with the Z6 III. And maybe a Z7 III comes a little later and basically becomes the D850 replacement. Or maybe the Z8 comes and it's even higher megapixels. But I just think it's more of a niche product. So there you go. That's my reasoning behind the fact that I think the Z6 III will be next. And with my mind in this same speculation space, I do think a D500 replacement could be coming, might be next. Yet again, I feel that product is just going to sell less units than a Z6 III that we've talked about in this episode. I'm going to create a poll, and if you could let me know, would you buy a 33 megapixel 7K 10-bit shooting Z6 III, which has pretty much the same sort of focus system, give or take, as a Z9, or would you want to buy a Z8 first? Please let me know in the comments below, and please do vote in the poll. Have you ever thought about going to a photography festival? See, I'd never thought about it either. I kind of didn't even know that they existed. But this year, for the first time ever, I am going to the Bright Festival of Photography, otherwise known as BFOP. And not only am I going, but I'm going to be running a few workshops. One is on how to get into manual and to feel comfortable with it. And the other one is about videography. What's the basics of videography? What do you need to get out there and make it all happen? Maybe you want to be a YouTuber, or maybe you want to supplement your photography with videography. And I just want to help you understand your camera, what it can do, and go through the basics of that. We're sort of halfway between Sydney and Melbourne. It's 3 days of fun and adventure. I would love to see you there. Jump on their website, BFOP, and sign up, and I'll see you. Let me know in the comments if you're interested or coming to BFOP. See more information below. Okay. And if you're overseas, we'd love to have you there too. You've got 1 month to organise yourself. It has been so good to see you, and if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please don't forget to subscribe, please share, please like, click on the notification bell so you know when I release another one of these videos, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. All right, bye for now.